Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. Everyone, I want to continue my custom, if you know, as you guys are following us. And that custom is to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive. Time. What a precious commodity that has been offered to mankind. What a gift. And 24 hours to every man and woman. So how you utilize time, how you respect time, how you honor time will tell me much about you. And if you don't honor her, she will explain some things to you as it goes. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created the individual before us. And this individual is bodied in this body. And her name is called Dr. Smith. And so, Dr. Smith, we want to thank you for coming to Threads of Enlightenment to spend some of that expensive stuff with us here. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
It is my joy to be here.
It's an honor. As I mentioned just before the podcast, I always ask, I came from corporate America and they always tell us to have our elevator speech up. My question to you is, as I mentioned to you, we have two journeys. The initial is to get to know who we are, and then the gift, if you will. How do you serve mankind?
I serve mankind through helping people be able to understand the benefit of rest and restoration, helping them get back to a place of not just the physical rest, but the spiritual, emotional, creative, every aspect of themselves that gets depleted, all the energy that we pour out into the world. I feel like we have a lot of people right now who are giving from their emptiness and they no longer know how to pour back in, because they think rest is just about sleeping or going on vacation. And so I like to help people go deeper into what rest really means for them, and then how they can use that restored energy to then go out and do the things they're really passionate about.
Well, like I said, I grew up in the church, and I remember reading between those pages as well as the Quran and all those different books and religious pages that I've studied. Einstein, all of these guys. Rest is where they get their answer. And Jesus Christ did every one of his most powerful stuff after he rested. So rest is very important, and not physical, is much deeper than that. And when you get to that space, it will heal you inside out, and people will recognize your movement of power. And we have someone that is here to educate you and I about the terminology rest. So, Doc, one of our customs that we have here also is to go back. The beginning of our beginnings, I tell people, where we get to hang out for a few times, these locations. First one is the family. And we go through all the different areas, education, the school, we go to church, we go to all these different things, college, corporate America, all these programmers, places that program you and I. And I know we always focus on this, but I tell people there are other programs, the dark emotions that are each very more destructive. And we have depression, we have anxiety, we have all these other programmers that are constantly programming you and I today. Your family unit. This is where you're going to learn a lot of stuff, communication skills, behavior, all that stuff. What was your family unit like?
My family unit was non-traditional. It was very chaotic from the start. My mother and father were a young couple having their first child. My mother died in childbirth. My father left the hospital with a newborn in his arms. He was in the military and not equipped to take care of a newborn. So I was raised by my 77-year-old great-grandmother in a home where God was revered and everything was kind of pointed back to God's plan. And as a child growing up, particularly 5 years old, I remember someone telling me, well, God must have needed your mother more. So I grew up hating God, because how can he need my mother more? And I'm a newborn, literally just out of her wound. So it was a time when I had a lot of exposure to spirituality in a time of a great pain and inability to actually receive what was being said to me, or even the love that was trying to be given to me in different ways. So it ended up really creating a personality of, I can do it myself. I was like the go-doer. If it had to be done, I got it done. I remember, stepping out and doing things that people my age would not even think about doing, because I had kind of this mindset of time is precious, as you mentioned, and it can be taken at any moment. And so I need to get as much packed into my life as I can. And so I ran hard at the world and hard at every goal that I ever had.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I tell people about how trauma produce and give birth to us. And here's this young girl took that information. Again, I tell people trauma happens where people are evil and they create trauma. And then sometimes it happened in such a benign way, it's just simple thing. Person said something, but the thing that made it a trauma was the interpretation of that little individual about what was done and said. And so here's this little individual interpret that, and as a result made an internal decision and started a quest that gave birth to her to become this individual that it'll do everything. As you are moving through running hard, as you said, and what was your communication skills with others while running hard, as you stated?
Say my communication skills were really based around knowing that networking was how I was going to get out of where I was at. I grew up in poverty, the projects, as some people would say. I did not grow up with money or funds. I grew up with food stamps and all the things that you do when you're poor. And so I knew for me to get out of that situation, I had to know people out of that situation. I wasn't going to get there was no college fund. There was going to
Yeah.
have to be relationships, scholarships, all the things. And so I realized that communication was a gateway. It was a gateway of building relationship with teachers. It was a gateway to getting jobs at places that I otherwise probably wouldn't have got a job at other than them saying, "Wow, she seems really smart." And all of that was simply by being able to communicate what I was desiring and communicating what I could offer people.
Now, Doc, when someone for listening to us and to the untrained ear, if you will, all he said was just flew by there. But that's a interesting thing for a young woman to be able to observe all of that knowledge and insight, to utilize that knowledge to get what she wants, if you will, to move her through from poverty into her perception of what she needs to get out of that. How did all of that come about? I mean, where did you get it from? You just don't do that. What was the genesis of it?
What
Was it
started
an
it? I got you.
internal thing that was always there? What was it that propelled this young girl to understand communication skills and the benefit that it would bring?
Because I was watching it. I was seeing it in real time in other people's lives. I was watching TV and seeing other people, and I'm watching them use communication to move forward. I mean, I'm at an age where Oprah was like all over the place when when I
Yeah.
was growing up, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching this girl who basically said she grew up just like me. And all of a sudden, she's like everywhere, and everybody wants to hear what she has to say. And people are, praying that they can get on her show and all this stuff. And I started watching, and not just her, but even just something as simple as I remember going to the doctor's office as a child, like, 5, 6, 7, whatever age it was. And I remember sitting down, and it was a female doctor, it was a pediatrician we were at. And I remember sitting down and watching her explain whatever I was sick with at the time
Yeah.
to my grandmother, and watching how intent my great grandmother looked at her. And I was like, and I was sitting here, and, as a child watching this, thinking, when you have power, people want to hear what you have to say. And so there is this perception that communication is associated with power. And as someone who felt powerless as a child,
Yeah.
I wanted that kind of power.
Yeah. And so as an individual that wanted that kind of power, when you're looking towards college, heading towards that kind of power, which college did you pick and why did you pick that college? And also what field of study did you pick?
Yeah, so I went to University of Georgia. I picked that specific college. First of all, I lived in Athens, Georgia, so it was down the street. I had gotten favor in the college at 16-year-old. I was one of the youngest people in there who had an actual job as a researcher getting paid. So I had history with the college,
Yeah.
and I got a scholarship. So all things lined up to be able to make that the only logical choice, because I did not have funds to go anywhere else.
Yeah, one of the things that I tell people, Doc, that we manifest things all through our lives, but we never really stopped and look at it and labeled it as manifestation. Later on, when we get into our personal development and stuff like that, and we learn about it and stuff like that, then we kind of start looking back going, wow. But I tell people we have been manifesting things all through our life, good or bad. We are that powerful that we will manifest it, good or bad. And so it's just a matter of taking that breath and looking back and investigating one's life, and you'll see that you've done it. And most of the time, the place by which we are standing from when we're looking back. We manifest, we talked about that way back then, but we're standing in the manifestation of that conversation that this young individual have. So here you are, you got in there, you're in Georgia. Granddaughter lives there. I love that state. Great food, great jazz. I love the whole thing. The clubs are just the top of the line. So here you are. You have propelled yourself through understanding of communication skills, networking, and you have arrived, if you will. Once you are there in college, 16 years working, you're part of the system there, if you will. As you're there and you're engaging with others, how was Dr. Smith, how were you handling yourself as a young woman, as not Dr. Smith yet, as Saundra? How were you handling yourself as Saundra while she was here?
A big part of that in college was figuring out how there was this transition, obviously going from living at home with my great grandmother to now I'm living in the dorm and now I have, freedom
Yeah.
and all this stuff. So there was this big transition of how to enjoy this newfound freedom and still get straight A's because I
Wow.
knew I wanted to go to medical school.
Yeah.
And still be able to stay on top of a lot of these things. So for me, it was a lot of trying to figure it out, that first year. And then, I felt like I started, and honestly, I ended up going back to what I felt like what I did in high school worked. So I'm going to just keep doing that. So I kept building up relationships. When I first got there, I was like, oh, this is not going to work. This is different. I don't know everybody. It's not like high school. But I found out it's really the same thing. The more you're able to communicate people, the more you put yourself out there. I would go talk to teachers after class. I would make myself known. So because I still saw the same thing replicated. Communication got you further. And so I just started doing it all over again.
People are people, aren't they? It doesn't matter where you're locating and how do people speak to each other. Communication. We have the body language, we have the nonverbal communication, and then we have the verbal communication and all the different things. And when one begins to study both, I know women are so far ahead of us men. We're just little babies when it comes to you guys and when it comes to our development of understanding languages and communication skills. You guys are so far ahead of us. We are still like in caveman kind of terminology when we're looking at the women because you guys are so far ahead. But here you are, you recognize the importance of it, Doc, and you are studying and you're moving through your life. As you are there, learning, networking, and seeing results, how did you begin to implement those things to make your life exactly how you wanted it to be? It's great to have the networking and the people, but now you have to start knitting, if you will, all these relationships to begin to make something for you. How did that begin to come about?
Yeah, so I didn't know enough about what I needed to do to get into medical school. I didn't know anybody who was a doctor, personally. So I started this journey really of just deep diving into asking people questions who had what I wanted.
Yeah.
I would call up like my local pediatrician because I still lived in town. I wasn't seeing her anymore, but I'd call her up and I'd say, hey, can I come by maybe your office after work for like 10 minutes or, just ask you a couple of questions. I'm a student here at, University of Georgia. And I did this with so many different people. I did this with biology professors. I did this with researchers and I found out, hey, if I majored in biochemistry, it would make me look better to a medical school. Hey, if I did this summer research at school, it would make me look better. Hey, if I did, and I started learning things from people. And then when I would put into practice what I heard them say, they said, oh, you need to show leadership. I thought, how can I show leadership and still get my dorm paid for? I can be a resident assistant,
Wow.
I get paid and I get leadership skills and I get all this stuff. So I started kind of piecing together, how do I hear you saying this? I need to do this. How can I make that work with my current situation? And you just become scrappy. When you grow up a certain way, being scrappy is kind of part of life. I just became scrappy about, okay, this is what I got to do. This is what I need. Let me figure out what the next step is.
Yeah, but that's brilliant scrappying. If this were a word, just listening to your story is just brilliant how this young woman is looking into her life, if you will. Not many of us on this globe approach life like that, determined, focused in a way, just grabbing knowledge, information outside of herself to get to bring into her space to propel her to her direction or where she wanted to go. Not many people, Doc, on this planet that do that. And so that's something that this young girl is just, for lack of a better terminology, just badass, as they say, in how she's approaching her life to create her future. As she's there, she's doing this stuff. But talk to us about when, as you begin to incorporate the biology, all the different things, when you decided it was time to go for medical school, and how did it look, as you said, you were putting all these pieces of the puzzle together when you did finally say, okay, showtime. How did that pan out?
Yeah, I applied everywhere I could afford to apply to. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's no different than it is now. Each application has a fee attached to it.
yeah.
So I applied to maybe about 5 or 6 schools, interviewed at maybe 4 of those 5 or something like that. Was fortunate to be able to interview at most of the ones that I applied to. I didn't apply to
Mhm.
Harvard or any of these like gigantic schools. I knew I couldn't afford anything like that. I applied to schools around the Southeast, schools in Tennessee, schools in Georgia, school in Alabama. And so places that I could technically drive to and actually get to on the budget I had to work with. And it really came to after I interviewed at these different schools, there was one that just really stood out. It felt very right.
Mhm.
And it was Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's a HBCU professional school, which I know there
Yes.
aren't many of those, but it just felt right. I'd never been in a situation like that. I've always been in schools where I'm not the majority. I'm usually a minority in those
Yeah.
situations. So especially University of Georgia, it's a massive school. So it
Yeah.
it was just very different to see so many people who looked just like me, who were doing all these great things. And at the time, the Surgeon General was actually even a Meharry graduate. So it was just an experience that I thought, this is where I want to be. I feel like I will get something here that I haven't gotten in the other places that I've already experienced similar
Yeah.
situations in.
And being there, here's this young girl, kind of like put all her stuff together and did it. And she's there, and you arrived in the sense that you feel that this is closer to home internally and that you would gain much insight, some knowledge here. What did you gain as you were there?
Yeah, I think if nothing else, it really helped me feel like I was okay. I
Hmm.
think a part of me always felt like I had to show up and present in a certain way, especially just in how my school and early education was, that I
Hmm.
had to show up a certain way, look a certain way. And I just really kind of got a piece about who I am as a
Hmm.
Black woman from the South. I look a certain way, I talk a certain way, I dress a certain way. I got comfortable kind of in my own skin, I guess is the best way
Yeah.
to put it.
Yeah, as you became comfortable in your own skin, and there's nothing like, I tell people that one of the most attractive things you'll ever see in an individual is when they're in their own skin. You know, there is a confidence that they walk and speak with, and they glide, if you will. And here's this girl just gliding there. She earned it, you know. You did the work, you did all, but paid your dues and so forth. As you're dealing with people now that you're a physician and all these different things, you'll get to see some the mindsets of individual as you begin to move through and um, as you're settling in. Talk to me as when you're there, because now you're going to get a chance to mingle with the the people, if you will, and you'll get to see the different beliefs. How did it affect you? Because it does have a play in the healing process. It has a play in everything. Because I came out of the medical field and I know, yeah. How did you handle all that data coming to you from those individuals as you are mingling with each and every one of them and seeing that they are not in rest, in a state of rest, if you will?
Yeah, that was this probably the most surprising part of the whole process for me, because as you just stated, I felt like when I got that medical degree, "Oh, this is it. This is what I've been working for. I've arrived, you
Yeah.
know, check it off the box. I'm good." And I remember maybe it was like a year or 2 into practicing medicine, after residency, that's kind of its
Yeah.
own thing. But, in the place where I was working at practicing medicine, and I remember, it was right after I kind of renewed my own spiritual relationship and spiritual journey,
Hmm.
I started to experience things that bothered me that didn't bother before.
Yeah.
For example, like when someone comes in and they have a problem, and I'm a physician, so there's only so much I can do to help certain problems. But people would come in and they weren't talking to me just about like, oh, my
Mm-hmm.
head hurt or my foot hurts. They were talking to me about how, their estranged relationship with their kids, or they were talking to me about things related to how they were feeling about themselves. And it was as much psychological as it spiritual as it was physical.
Yeah.
And I wasn't equipped for that. No one, I barely got back into the Bible and going to church myself. And I certainly didn't have any psychology training because I'm an internist. So I
Yeah.
know the body, but I didn't know the mind and the spirit the way people were coming at me. And so it really just kind of awakened me to how deep health is and how many layers and facets of it there are.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the things that really just stood out to me that kind of took me on that journey of exploring rest and spirituality and all was that I remember one person who, after listening to her talk, I said, well, what if it's not a pill you need? What if it's actually something that's a mindset shift? And I
Mm-hmm.
remember how mad she got. It was like, Just give me the pill already." It's like, "Write me the prescription, give me the pill, let me go." And
Yeah.
it broke my heart that
Yeah.
somebody wanted the fix so fast, knowing that it would not be a permanent, it'd just be like a Band-Aid.
Yeah. That's us though. The fix require internal dialogue. You need to go and dig. Mindset has, you have to go in to get answers. And that is a scary place to go. It's a scary place for anyone. And we all have to go there. So here you are, you mentioned something again, and again, it's kind of glossed over, and I'm going to bring you right back to it because you've reconnected with God. Because here's this young girl, after hearing a statement that God needed mom, that's why he took her. This young girl just said, I don't need none of that. I got me. I'm going to do it on my own. And so I think God loves that because after a while we get into situation, because I know some situation came into your life that caused you to go back and start looking into God going, wait a minute, I can't do it on my own. This particular thing I can't do. So talk to me about that reconnecting, because that becomes important. That is the catalyst, if you will, the point by which now you are going to start changing and recognize that, wait a minute, the human being is not just about the body. There's other aspects of us, the mind, and the power of the mind, which will contribute to some of these diseases that we manifest in our life because you're not dealing with the spiritual aspect. How did you reconnect with God?
Yeah, it was through actually a teacher, not a medical school teacher, but a teacher all the same,
Yeah.
who I was just kind of batting ideas around with because I had so many questions coming out of residency and medical school because I just really, there was obviously no mention of anything spiritual in any of those type
Mm-hmm.
settings. So I was coming out of that setting just really open a lot,
Yeah.
experienced a lot. You go through medical school and residency, you have successes, you have failures, you see people live, you see people die, you see the best of mankind, you see the worst of mankind, you see it all and
Yeah.
everything in between. And so I was coming out of that in just a really raw state. And had a lot of questions, a lot of seeking, just a lot of like, I don't understand this. Like, I know a lot of stuff. I passed all
Yeah.
the USMLEs. I know a whole lot of information, and I feel so stupid about certain things because I feel like I don't know nothing
Yeah.
about these areas. And so I started reaching out to and kind of just trying to learn. And one of the teachers I reached out to made this statement that just stuck in my head. And I can't remember exactly how he said it, but I was explaining how it's so difficult, the difficulty I was having in treating patients in certain situations like that particular woman. And his statement was, he's like, well, have you addressed their spirit? And I'm like, I was
Yes.
like, well, what are you talking about? Like, have I addressed their spirit? Like, I don't even know what you're saying to me.
Yeah.
He's like, how can you actually help them if you haven't addressed the strongest part of them?
Yes.
And it was so it was such a mind-bending moment because I'm like, and I argued. I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, their body takes them here and there, and their mind tells them what to do, and he just so patiently just kind of unfolded. He didn't say the Bible.
Yeah.
Now I know it's the Bible. He knew I was
Yeah.
antagonist against God.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he didn't say the Bible, but I later found out that's where all his stuff came from. But he unfolded the scripture to me in a way that my logical, rational brain could
Hmm.
understand it. And he
Yeah.
kind of gave this analogy of like an egg and a shell. And I don't even remember all the details how he said it, but the way he said it, so kind of like it's like I ingested it. I didn't just
Hmm.
hear it. It like went in and found a place to settle.
Yes.
And it was just this tiny little seed of something, but it was such a hot seed. It's like it was
Hmm.
not going to be put out. It's like I had to know more, and I
Yeah.
just stayed under his guidance for a long time. He was a beautiful mentor in my life for a very long time, kind of teaching me some of these things that I did not want any part of, and that got me back into a church. And I think God kind of took it from there.
Yeah.
You get in the right type of church where you have
Yes.
real spirit-filled
Teaching,
believers who are
wisdom,
able
the
to
real
go
stuff.
there with you. It changes things.
Yeah, there's church and then there's the real stuff. Because again, I grew up in church and I pastored a church. And I remember when I began to question some of the things that we were being taught. And I told them, I said, the being, the man, he's much deeper than what these pastors are talking about. And I left to go on a quest to dig deep to find out more and more. And as I dig deep, more and more, I found that how the traditions of men have caused the word of God to have no effect. The church is way into tradition and not the word. So it's painful to watch what is happening within this sphere of quote unquote church. But when you find the right place, the men and women there that are using the Bible as what it was made for and produced for, food, it's incredible what happens there. So here you are, God reconnected with you because he has we did not come to this planet to have a job and then die. God had an assignment for us. I always tell people that I'll give them a perfect example of Peter and his boys and his brothers and everybody fishing and Jesus walking on it. He comes up to them and says, leave your job, follow me and I'll make you a fisher of men. And, what does that mean to these guys? But it resonated within them that it tells us that they dropped everything to pursue their assignment. And so God always wants you to fulfill your assignment because your assignment has to do with your kingdom responsibility. So as you're moving down, you're being awakened. God awaked you and you are now dealing with the people and you're realizing that man and most of them just love that pill versus digging deep. And that began to affect you. When that happened, because that's a profound encounter, because that'll open your eyes to all kinds of stuff. What did it do to you? And how did you pursue dealing with that?
Yeah, it really changed how I approached medicine because when that happened, I was like most doctors who have an office practice. Every visit was 15 minutes. Get them in, get them out,
Hmm.
Many
Yeah,
as I can
yeah.
get in and out because that's how you make the money. It really got me to thinking I need more time with people.
Hmm.
I can't do what I feel like needs to be done. Now knowing what my mentor has taught me about the spirit and now knowing what kind of like what I need to do to even get to where I can really help them. I
Yeah.
can't do that in 15 minutes. And so first thing it did was I started changing kind of how I structured my visits. I
Hmm.
had more time with people, and the more time you spend with people, the more you see the need, which then means you need more time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't add more time at that point. I'd already extended my hour, my patient visits to the max of what I could potentially do. And so for myself, I started looking for how are other ways I can start serving these people, even if I can't just physically talk to them and communicate with them, in person. So I
Yeah.
started just writing up all of these little handouts and pamphlets on different things.
Hmm.
And I started giving them to my patients with their appointments. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like, oh, you have high blood pressure, do this, do that. No, it actually had like reflection questions about how they were living, things for them to like consider about their all aspects of their health. And some of them had even scriptures attached to them. And so I started noticing that not only were they consuming it, they were asking for it to give to other people.
Wow.
And so that led to me all of it, eventually getting this feeling like I think God's telling me to write a book.
Yeah.
And so that's where my first book was written back in 2009. And I say the rest is history. He's kind of just replicated that in different types,
Yeah.
topics, and different things. But that's where it began. It began just feeling like I can't say everything I want to say in these 15 minutes. I gotta find another way to communicate with them.
Guys, all of you that are listening to us, we're going to provide all of Doc's links so you can get to her and get her books. I've said it a million times. The books within those walls that we call the covers house wisdom and knowledge and insight, stuff that will change your life. Because it was in one of those books that I read stuff that changed my life. And one of those books is called the Bible. And within those pages, house wisdom, knowledge, insight, stuff that will free the human being. And so when you approach a book, I always tell them, Doc, approach a book with the intention to receive something from it. So that means you have to learn how to put your mind in a state of rest, and which we're going to go into in that theta states. The mind is all brain waves and different things through meditation. As they're studying those things and the chanting, they recognize that it is a sound state that is putting these individuals into trances that are able to gain more insight. Now, as you begin to move through your life, God's showing you, giving you wisdom, insight as you begin to produce these books. He's going to open something to you with the rest about recognizing the risk of this thing, because it is the human being needs it, not just the body. The body, of course, we know the amount of time. They say that time is 8 hours and so forth. But that individual for wholeness, we know that Jesus went away from his disciples to gain that wholeness. And then when he would come out from those situations, he'd walk on water, he'd feed 5,000, he did all kinds of stuff. So when one becomes whole, spirit, soul, and body, things are happen to us. Talk to us about this revelation of the rest and the value of it, because outside of rest is stress and all these other things that will cause the body to crash and burn. And we even have a terminology when you're living outside of rest, you call it burnout. And so talk to us about this revelation that you started getting inside of rest and the value of that to us, the human being.
Yeah, so it's interesting you said burnout because that's actually where I found got the revelation. I consider that probably the lowest point of my life. I thought my childhood was probably the lowest point of my life, but I had a lot of great success with what I did with the first books and doing all of that stuff, and had an extremely successful practice, a lot of things going on, great family life, all the fixings of success that I had hoped and
Mhm.
ever prayed for. And remember one day picking up my kids from daycare, they were both toddlers, less than 2. And I got home and I walked in the door and I was so exhausted. I was so exhausted. And I remember just laying out on the floor in my house and I'm looking up at the chandelier and I'm thinking, I literally have everything that little 5-year-old girl ever asked for. Why does none of this satisfy? I am so
Mhm.
tired. I can't even enjoy the blessings that are in my life. I don't even want to ask for anything else because I don't have energy for anything. And I remember just laying on that floor, just with tears running down my face. And I in my heart was saying, "How did I get here?"
Yeah.
And God's never spoken to me like verbally or anything like that, but it was one of those rare occasions where I really felt like God spoke into my heart. And the question was, "You've never asked me about this. You've never asked
Yeah.
me about rest. You've been working. You've been doing all this work for me and all this work
Mhm.
that you feel like is, accomplishing and it was accomplishing things, but I didn't have an understanding of where rest played into it. I felt like,
Yeah.
well, God, I'm doing godly work. I'm doing good stuff for people. I'm serving people well, but I didn't have a revelation of how rest fit into the equation. And it took me on a journey really through the Bible. I'd never really studied the Bible very much before then I read it, but I
Yeah.
hadn't really meditated on it. And so for one of the first times ever, I meditated on the word of God, and I specifically in like a year in Genesis. And it was
Mhm.
during one of those times of just kind of sitting with the Bible that it kind of hit me all of a sudden like, okay, mankind was created on the 6th day, God rested on the 7th. And, and I never really had thought about, okay, well, animals were made first on the 6th day, then mankind, and then rested. And I was like, what was mankind doing on that 7th day? And
Yeah.
there's no mention of any work. And it's like, there's no mention of work until the whole next chapter, right? So I was like, wow, I spent all of my life thinking that I had to work. And if I worked enough, then I earned the privilege of resting. Where when
Mhm.
I look at a biblical example, mankind's first full day on the earth was the day of rest. They
Mhm.
were created, commissioned, so to speak, told who they are, identity and assignment. And then before any of that was ever started, was this place of rest. And so
Yeah.
it changed my thinking that rest isn't what I work to, it's what I work from.
Mm-hmm.
And once I started living out of that and started sharing with other people about living out of that, it was like, oh, wow. People, this their whole mindset of how to rest changed.
Yeah.
Instead of just having like this work ethic that I think so many people have, people started actually listening when I started talking about what is your rest ethic? Like, how do you position rest in your life? And I find that as the more people start actually kind of evaluating those questions for themselves, the quicker they're able to see when they start feeling that drain, that depletion, that burnout type state. And the quicker they realize that if I want to get back on track, it begins with rest. It doesn't end there.
Yeah. Rest is, the Bible talks about entering into God's rest. And there's a great deal of surrender there. There's a great deal of peace. And when one allows the peace of God to be the guiding force within your life, you walk in that rest and you're able to perform much better when you come from that place, because what happens there, the mind becomes clearer. Your vision becomes clearer. You got your energy there. Power is there, sustaining power, not this physical stuff, that the real stuff is able to work, and one will work. And again, I use Jesus because Jesus comes and he is doing all these wonderful work, but he's always resting, and no one really talks about this, and it's important that he did it. He showed us the importance of it. And if he's going to show us the importance of it, then we need to pay attention to it, because like I said, he came out walking on water, doing all kinds of crazy stuff after he came out from that place. And so what does that mean? Is that we are walking different. We're thinking different. We are walking in the fullness of our power or faith, if you will. Jesus Christ is able to break the natural laws by being in a place of rest first before he began to walk into the world, because it gave him the ability to supersede the natural laws that are governing the earth. No one is supposed to be walking on water, because there's this law of gravity that pulls us in. But we know for a fact in the data that there were two men on this planet that did it, and both of them did it by faith. And faith is that power that all causes you and I to supersede all of the natural work. But where do you get that stuff from? You got it from a place of rest. And when you switch that, everything begins to move a little. So here you are, you began to switch. You saw the insight, the importance of that, and you were laying on the floor crying. And once you got that revelation, talk to us about this new life, because it is a revelation. And God, you didn't ask me. He says, yeah, come and I'll ask and I'll give it to you. So you ask, and he began to introduce you to it. What was the result that you saw in your life? I know you mentioned that others were beginning to see it and stuff, but you were on the floor. You are the first victim of this, and you are now going to be a part that is going to learn that. How and what did it do to you as you began to implement what you received on that floor?
Yeah, it changed everything because it was a complete paradigm shift of what I had ever thought. In my mind, I was thinking, okay, okay, God, if I'm going to rest, you're going to take all this work away and I'm going to be laying around and doing nothing. And actually, what he did was the opposite. He opened up greater doors, gave more opportunity, and showed me how to rest in the working and how to flow in and out of times of rest and times of work. And a big part of that, my background in research came forward. I was in clinical practice. I had
Yeah,
not done research in forever, but the whole 7 types of rest concept came from kind of some grassroots type research to see that there's the physical, spiritual, and mental, social, emotional, creative, all these types of rest that we need, and actually kind of terming that and putting it into a way that people could digest it, because that was a big part of it. It was like, God, it took me all this time to learn this stuff to apply it to my own life. How do I now truncate it so that people can quickly get it and get the
yeah,
benefit and get up and running, get up
yeah,
and running with their rest, so to
yeah.
speak, so that they can start applying this to their life. But yeah, that was the big paradigm shift for me, was just seeing how when I applied it, I
Mhm.
actually had more energy to do the different things that he was calling me to do.
Yeah, because you're breaking laws. As I said, Jesus, it empowers us There's and I remember reading, as I mentioned, Ben Franklin stories, Tesla. I read about Benjamin Franklin and all these guys. They're so consumed about Ford. Was also, I read his story when these guys are so consumed about getting this thing fixed, and then they moved away from it and they put themselves in a state of play, relaxation, rest. And they began to do things outside of the workspace. And every one of them talked about that they got the answer in the state of rest, not in that state where they were at. And once you bring the entire being in a state of rest, then communication begins between God and that individual. The internal conversation begins to look different then, because he's the one that is putting these things in them. People go, oh, I see it. And then they run back and try that and it works. And so I want to encourage all of you guys that are listening to Doc and I, the place of rest is where the answer is. If I'm telling you, I listed these guys' lives and stuff like that. Go read their story. They'll tell you. And you'll see Jesus is another example. Doc is another example of all of these different things that we are talking about. And we're going to provide all of her stuff. So Doc, talk to us about your 7 aspects of rest. You mentioned it, and I love your acronym that you have of it and how it spells out. Talk to those that are listening to us about some of those places, spaces that they need rest, that they're not familiar with. We're just talking about it. But if you can dance a little with that so that we could make them aware of it. And again, guys, buy the books. It will give you more data, more insight concerning each that Doc is going to share with us. Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, so just a quick summation, and it's all, as you mentioned in my book, Sacred Rest, but the 7 types of rest include physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. I feel like most people have an idea of what the physical and, mental and spiritual are. The emotional, social, and creative were some of the ones that a lot of people aren't as familiar with, particular dividing up mental from emotional, because mental
Mm-hmm.
has more to do with our reasoning and our rationale, and emotions obviously with our feelings. Sensory, looking at the people in our lives and how different relationships actually use energy. And finding some of those relationships that are restorative. Rest really is about restoration. So it's not about stopping simply, but where are the people who pour back into you? Those are the people who will give you social rest, that are life giving, that are affirmative, that are speaking life over you. With creative rest, a lot of people experience this but didn't know what they were experiencing. Like they will say, if I go out in nature, I feel like I'm more refreshed, or if I'm at the beach or the mountains or something, I feel kind of light. And that's really what creative rest is. Creative rest is the restoration that we experience when we allow ourselves to appreciate natural beauty or even man-made beauty like art and music and theater,
Yeah.
and just recognizing that there's different parts of us that have to be restored. And those restoration periods are rest periods. They're rest stops along the way. So things that happen that pour back into the deficit of energy that we use when we're out doing our work in our day-to-day lives.
I think your book, Doc, is such a needed tool in today's society because we see a lot of people are in a state of unrest. I just came back from America and it is a country that is unrest. And everyone that I was talking to, it was something else to witness when I went into the stores and stuff. The place that I came back to was unrecognizable. And you could see the stress and the restlessness in those faces of the individuals some of them, I went up and talked to someone because of the intensity of her, the look is kind of, I knew that there was a need there and I went up and talked. And so here we are today, 2025. And I usually ask this question to some people, not all. What is it on your heart, Doc, that you're seeing? And I know you mentioned that there's something that's a product that you're working on, a book that is about to come out. What is it on your heart that God has laid there? And He's laying much on many people's heart because the assignment needs to be done. What is it you feel that God is laying on your heart for you to offer us, to make us aware that we need to investigate some of those things?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would probably say it's simply this, that there's, even after all of the conversations I've had about the 7 types of rest and all the stuff I've done with that, I just really kept feeling like God was saying there's a rest that still remains. There's
Yeah.
still this level of rest that people were not really getting. And a big part of that was the rest of identity, that deeper level of peace within themselves of who they are and how they show up in the world. And apart from their doing, apart from their performance, apart from the expectations, the roles, all the different things that are on their plate, but that level of identity that is at the very deepest core of who they are and just their
Mhm.
being.
Yeah.
And so, as you mentioned, I have a book coming out actually in the next couple of weeks or so called Being Fully Known. And it's really just about that, getting deeper into looking at themselves from the inside out and
Yeah.
not from the outside in, and allowing themselves to go through that process of what happened. What was the trauma? How has it shaped my life? How is it framing the way I show up in the world? How is it limiting? Is it limiting? Are there areas of growth that I draw back from because I'm afraid of what I'll find when I see myself a certain way? Am I
Yeah.
afraid of what people will say when they see me actually living free in certain ways because they're so used to seeing me in this one frame?
Yeah.
And just helping people kind of break out of that. I call it the tomb of living unknown
Yeah.
and having parts of themselves hidden away even from themselves, because I feel like that's the rest that still remains. I feel like that's the restlessness that so many people have, and they break out into it sometimes, like we call it a midlife crisis, but usually there's no crisis. There's just a moment of reality where
Yeah.
they actually get free from some of those limitations. And I think that we have a lot of people who are ready to break free from that without having to wait till they're 60, 70 to get
Yeah.
there. They just need a moment to recognize it.
I'm going to leave it at that, guys. Doc said exactly what we need to do in this life. I think that is one of our first assignment, is to learn how to rest within who we are as individuals, the power that God has created and given to us to have dominion over, not just all of this stuff, but that is about learning about ourselves. As we learn about who we are, we walk in love, we walk in empathy, we walk in forgiveness, we walk in these beautiful things that people have an opportunity to witness as we are expressing what our Father is teaching us, and we are learning from Him, and that is love governs all. Doc, thank you so much for coming to the Threads of Enlightenment. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It was an honor.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.